Hi everyone, this is Dr. Stephen Nawara with the Political Science Department at Lewis University. We are recording today the first podcast and will hopefully be a long series called the All Is Well podcast from Lewis University, put on by the Lewis University Wellness Committee. This first podcast we have a group of students from my campaigns and elections class who've done a lot of research about voting and voter issues for the 2020 presidential election year. And so we're going to go around and have a discussion about voter registration, absentee voting, and some of the bigger picture questions about turning out to vote. So I just want to go around and introduce who will be joining us with the conversation today and maybe what year in school you are.
My name's Saenovia, and I'm a freshman.
My name's Nicole. I'm a junior.
My name's Matt. I'm a junior.
I'm Josh. I'm a junior.
All right, welcome everyone. Let's start maybe with Matt. So we know from past elections that typically about 70% of eligible adults over the age of 45 turn out and vote. Yet in 2016, only 42% of voters under 30 showed up at the polls. Why is voter turnout lower among young people than the rest of the country?
Well, I think it's the first part is a lot of young people don't think their vote matters or that it really counts. Another part of it is a lot of young people don't know where to vote, especially if they're on a college campus. They don't know if they should register with their home address or their college address. And also a lot of younger people just don't think they can identify with most politicians now.
Yeah, so with all of these problems that are facing younger voters and those type of hurdles, what are the consequences of this? When fewer young people show up at the polls than older generations, what effects does that have?
I mean, the biggest thing is that you don't get your problems that affect college students solved. Like, for example, if not a lot of college students are voting, you probably won't get as many candidates who care about maybe lowering the cost of college affordability, or a lot of college students care about the issue of climate change, maybe the politicians that get voted in because the older generations don't care as much. You won't get that solved. So issues that affect college students don't get as much attention because we don't vote in candidates who would identify with younger people and college students.
Yeah, and the opposite of that's also true, right? The issues that are very important to older generations of voters tend to get priority. It's not just the younger generations that get shorted. Josh, maybe you can jump in with, given what Matt just discussed, how can the people listening to this register to vote? So if you're a young person at Lewis University or even a staff member or faculty member at Lewis and you want to register to vote, what can you do?
So for college students, they mostly have to look at a few different things. They have to see if they live on campus or if they commute. And if they're commuting to school, they would just use their home address to register to vote. And all registering to voting can be done online through vote.org or turbovote.lewisu.edu. And then if you are living on campus, you could either use the school address to register to vote, or you could select to do voting in your home state if it's somewhere else, and you could request a mail-in ballot with that state.
Okay, so whether or not you live on campus, it's still an option for you. And just to summarize, those living on campus basically have a choice, right? That they can vote using their Lewis University address, and if they do that, they would have to vote at the Lewis University polling place, which is at Romeoville High School right up the road on election day, or by mail early. If you vote using your home address, you would have to vote at your home polling place, correct? Or absentee, just to make sure everyone's clear about that. That if you use your home address as your voter registration address, you can't just show up at the Romeoville polling place, unless you happen to live in the Romeoville precinct, of course. Thank you. Let's turn then to Saenovia, because that discussion of voter registration for college students probably implies that a lot of college students are going to be voting absentee if they're using their home address, or voting early by mail. There's been a lot of talk about vote by mail in this election. If someone in Illinois wants to participate in the election but not go to their polling place on election day, what are their options? And how do they go about doing that?
People in Illinois do have a couple of options for voting if they decide they don't want to go to a polling place. There is absentee voting and there is early voting. I know a lot of the time people do get this mixed up, but that is not to be confused. Absentee voting is voting that allows an individual to do a mail-in voting, since the individual will not be in state the same day of the election. And early voting is voting that takes place beginning as early as 40 days before the election. And states usually do this to increase voter turnout. For absentee voting, this is it does sometimes, depending on the state, it does require different things. So you can have a state that's either has an excuse, no excuse, or mail-in only. But luckily for Illinois, unlike other states, you don't have to have an excuse. So all you have to do is request the ballot, and it'll be sent to your
yeah,
address.
that's wonderful. So like with the early voting, you're physically showing up at a polling place just early before Election Day. In Illinois, I can speak for Will County where I live. The Will County clerk sets up various polling centers in city halls, sometimes libraries and other park district buildings around the county. And it's up to you to show up to these at any point in the month or so before the election. I think you said 40-something days, right? They'll be starting very soon, actually. But voting by mail, you basically are mailed a ballot, and you can fill it out from your own home. So with that voting by mail, if someone is going to vote by mail, what do they have to do? What procedures do they need to go through to get a ballot, and what deadlines do they have to follow?
Procedures that they have to go through, they usually have to have a written statement and mail it in to the people who are giving the ballots. Again, depending on how strict your state is, it could change. Some will require you to have actual proof that you will not be in the state at that time. But as I said, for Illinois, you don't need an excuse. You just need to mail in saying that you will not be there, that you will not be here to vote. And then there are deadlines to apply for the absentee ballot. October 29th, 2020, which is 5 days before the election, you have to do that by then. And for early voting, like I said, starts 40 days before the election. And this year, early voting starts from September 24th, 2020 to November 2nd, 2020.
Okay, so if anybody's interested in early voting or vote by mail, they can find out where those locations are. They're either the County Board of Elections website, or they can request an absentee ballot on the County Board of Elections website, or just at vote.org or turbovote.louisu.edu. Nicole, we haven't heard from you yet. Based on what we've heard so far, registering to vote and voting, it doesn't sound too difficult. There's some procedural hurdles that have to be met, of course. But all this information still doesn't address some of the fears people might have about not knowing how to vote or get ready to vote. Chances are we all know that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are facing off in the presidential election, for instance. But we might not know about other candidates and other offices that will have the choice to make. So how do we find out more about who's running and what their positions are?
You can find out what offices and issues you'll be voting for by visiting your state's election office website. After seeing who you're voting for, you can visit their own personal individual websites to learn more about their positions on issues, legislation, and what agendas are. You can reference also voter guides that provide background information on the candidates and ballot measures. They'll list the candidates by race and offer details on each one's experience and goals. They'll explain any ballot measures, which are specific questions or issues that you can gather your own opinions and thoughts on. www.ballotready.org offers great voter guides by home addresses nationwide. Another option is to view sample ballots, which you can get from the County Board of Elections that will show you races and candidates along with ballot measures that will be on your ballot when it comes time to vote. It's also super important to stay in touch with current events. Once you know who your candidates are, you can check on their social media to get up-to-date information on what they're posting and sharing, and also stay tuned to your news stations and networks as they serve as good resources to access information on what is currently happening on a day-to-day basis nationwide and also locally.
Oh, great. Now, So if voters can get prepared using those sources that you mentioned, Ballot Ready, I can personally attest to. I use that for the past 2 elections myself. You basically type in your address. It's super simple, and they show you a sample ballot of all the races you're going to pick from, and you can find links to candidates' websites and endorsements and things like that. So in an ideal world, the voter can get ready before the election to figure out who they best, which candidates best would represent their views. But in terms of the practical aspects of voting then, how do voters even know where to go on election day? How do I find out where my polling place is, for instance?
You can find information about where to vote by checking with your election office. You can do this online, on the phone, mail, or in person. You can look up your election office website by going on www.usa.gov/election-office and clicking on your state. Each state then has their own website where you can find out where your polling place is. It usually will have you enter your zip code and address so the poll locator can filter out the exact location in which you're registered to vote based on your address. Like we said before, I know we said this earlier, this is the only location that you can physically show up and go vote in. It's important that that you can't just show up to any polling place and go vote if you are voting in person. If you'd like to contact or visit your election office in person, you can find their information by looking up the jurisdiction in which you reside, so the county that you live in, and visit their website to access information such as their address and phone number if you have other questions.
Perfect. What about the actual act of voting itself? If I wanted to show up at a polling place to vote for the first time, that might be pretty intimidating. Maybe, Josh, could you walk us through what it's like to actually vote? What happens when I show up? What do I need to bring, and so forth?
So like how Lewis University's polling place is Romeoville High School, most of them will be churches or libraries or schools. So if you choose to vote on the election day, you'll go into the polling place, and there may or may not be a line depending on which polling place you go to. They're all different. But if you do early voting, you'll get to skip the lines, which is nice. So when you go into the polling place, you'll give your name and you will go to the machine and place your vote. If there's a paper ballot, you'll just place it into a secure box, and then you'll get your I voted sticker, and you voted.
All right, perfect. Sounds pretty easy. Matt, maybe you can help kind of close this out here, and we can turn again to the broad subject of voter turnout. We talked at the beginning about how voter turnout often lags among younger people compared to older adults. So maybe we can kind of bring that full circle and kind of raise the question of how might some of those hurdles that are holding back younger voters be overcome in order to increase voter participation?
Yeah, I think the first way is that you can hold voter registration drives on high school and college campuses. I mean, that's how I registered to vote during high school. The League of Women Voters always was at our school and was registering voters. I think it's not just also on young people, but I think candidates have to do a better job of reaching out to younger people as well to make sure that they know that they have somebody they could trust. College and high schools can also just do voter info meetings and outreach. One of my professors when I was at College of DuPage before I transferred here would give extra credit for voting. If you went and voted, you'd get 10 extra points on the next exam. History and political science classes could do election teaching right before elections, and it can include assignments on where students research candidates. So maybe they feel like they're more inclined to go vote because they just researched all those candidates and they're more adept with the issues. So I think there's a bunch of different ways that we can drive up voting among young people. But I think of all the ones, if we just register more voters, I think, and make sure they know how to vote, I think more people will vote after that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So with that, I'd like to draw our conversation to a close. I just want to let any listeners know that I'm an associate professor of political science. My name's Stephen Nawara. If you have any questions about voting or how to vote or anything election related at all for that matter, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is nawarast@lewisu.edu, or you can just find me through the Lewis website. I'd like to thank Joe Glatz for helping record this podcast, the students from LUTN for helping to publicize it, and most of all, I'd like to thank all of the students in my campaigns and elections class for participating, not just the 4 students who spoke on the podcast today, but also their teams of researchers that helped them prepare for this podcast. Thank you specifically though for those that helped inform you today. So Josh, Matt, Nicole, and Saenovia. And in closing, just keep in mind that this is the first podcast and will hopefully be a series of wellness podcasts called the All Is Well podcast. In October, there's plans for another episode about keeping your immune system strong, so keep an eye out for that. And in closing, just one more reminder that Election Day is November 3rd, so please go vote, and we'll see what happens with the country. Good luck.